Well, this is pretty fun because Daryl has talked about this before on the podcast that we used to work together. And now we work together again, just in a very different context.
That's true.
But we also used to work with Alan Ing.
Hey,
and it is good to have you, sir. It is
great
good
to be
see
here.
again. Yeah. I don't know how long it's been since we worked together. But
well, let's see.
My
My daughter is 11 now, so 9 years, maybe.
yeah, something crazy like that. Yeah, I know it's so insane. It's been a long time.
I don't think she was walking when I left.
That's true. But I've known Alan for a long time because we're both big Disney fans and we're both big geeks. And now he's into. Tell us what you do. You're doing stuff for FilmThreat.
Yeah, I'm the managing editor at FilmThreat. So
Nice.
not only do I write reviews, but I also kind of manage the review content on the website. And we're publishing about 3 movie reviews every day.
Oh wow.
Mostly independent films.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is awesome because not a lot of people know what's going on in the independent film market.
Yeah. I mean, most outlets, they'll cover the big studio stuff. Obviously we'll do, the Marvel stuff, the DC.
Yeah.
But then we're doing the really low budgets, the medium budgets.
Yeah.
And, these filmmakers, they most of the time they're either at film festivals or they're on video on demand.
Yes.
And they just need some kind of love and publicity, even if it's a bad review.
Yeah.
But they especially like it when it's a good review.
Right.
Are you going to review the new Critters movie?
Personally not, but we will review it.
Well, Daryl, you're also here, and you're
I'm
going to
here.
host the show.
Thanks for the intro. You stole that one from Garrett from the story cauldron.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah, we are going to talk about Dark Phoenix.
Yeah.
The culmination of our X-Men series.
Yeah, controversial film.
We took a little week off there to talk about Time Slingers, but now we can finish off our X-Men series.
That's right.
Oh, this is the last one?
This
It
is the
is.
last
Yeah.
one in the series, yeah.
I, for the most part, kept up. So
The first question I have here is probably the most controversial,
Yeah.
given all of our opinions too. So like you said, we've talked about what we think of it. Alan, we don't know
Yeah.
what you think of it yet.
Yeah.
Well,
What did you think of it?
Well, Dark Phoenix as the story has a kind of special place in my own life. When I first started collecting comic books, the first 2 comics I bought was ROM #1 and an X-Men. I don't know the number, but it was basically the Hellfire Club. And if any of you out there know the X-Men saga, you know that the Hellfire Club are the events that lead to the Dark Phoenix saga.
Okay.
And so that's my jump into comic books. It was just how Mastermind and the Hellfire Club had basically screwed around with Jean Grey's mind, and then how she transformed into the Dark Phoenix, and then the event that occurred that caused her to basically die in the comic books.
Yeah.
And so there's that special place in my heart. And then when I went to WonderCon, I was at the Dark Phoenix panel, and there was why is his name slipping my mind? Who directed the movie? Simon Kinberg.
Yeah.
He talked about how he was similar to me, how this story was a big part of his life, and he wanted to do it justice. And so I was kind of going in with hope.
Yeah.
And I'll say this from 2 standpoints. One is as an action superhero movie, I really like Dark Phoenix.
Yeah.
I gave it a 7, so kind of
Okay.
an average film. But as the Dark Phoenix story itself and its place in the X-Men universe, I felt it was a little problematic.
Yeah.
But as a film, I liked it.
Yeah. In fact, when Scott Nicewinder was talking about his ranking, he hated the film because he loves the Dark Phoenix comics so much.
And I get that. Yeah.
And I didn't see it, so I had it at number 4 of my X-Men, and you did too, Daryl. We had it at number 4 for our X-Men films because I just went into it not knowing the Dark Phoenix storyline really at all, and going, I love Sophie Turner. It's at least an entertaining movie. It entertained me. Yeah, for sure, it's got problems, and we'll get into what some of those problems are, I'm sure. But I thought it was really fun. Now, Captain Midnight had the best quote ever, and I put it at the beginning of the podcast because he said something along the lines of this. He said something along the lines of like, "This film."
He said, "This is a film that will not be remembered in now."
Yeah, exactly. Which is a great quote, and it makes sense because we know that Disney's taking over.
Yeah.
And so that's basically going to reset everything. They're not going to go back to any of this. I mean, maybe they'll choose some of the same actors, but as far as like any of these storylines moving through, pretty much is going to be rebooted.
Yeah,
so it doesn't matter so much, you know.
I mean, it definitely felt like a B story single comic book issue.
Yeah,
you know, it's like it's a part of the X-Men universe, and we saw the story, and now we're going to move on.
Yes,
you know, a Star Trek episode.
right. Totally. Yeah, so I thought it was good. We all thought it was good.
I enjoyed it.
Yeah,
I actually really enjoyed it. I think I said in the last podcast that we did that 20 minutes in, I was sitting there thinking, I want to say that I like this, but I don't want to jinx it. You know?
I was thinking the same thing all the way through. It's like, you know, I'm liking this.
Yeah.
You know,
what's wrong with me?
And I will say the third act, the whole train sequence, probably one of the best X-Men
really
action
cool.
The
sequences.
train
I've seen.
sequence was great.
Yeah.
I mean, that's to me that's the epitome of what I wanted to see in terms of X-Men action.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, and I have read the original Dark Phoenix story, and obviously it's not faithful.
Yeah.
But, I mean, you had to kind of go into it expecting it to not be faithful. This is the Fox X-Men franchise. Nothing about it has been faithful.
Yeah.
True.
Well, then also in the comic, it was space driven.
Yeah, it was so much bigger.
Yeah, and that's something that was never a part of the X-Men movie series up until this point.
Yeah. That's a good point.
Yeah, so I really enjoyed it. I thought it was great.
Yeah.
Definitely had issues, and like you said, we will talk about them.
Yeah. We're going to get right into those.
Okay, I'm going to go on to my next question here. And this is one that I think has been getting a lot of attention in the internet world as well, so we'll see what we think of it. But Raven says to Charles at one point, "It's funny, I can't actually remember the last time you were the one risking something. And by the way, the women are always saving the men around here. You might want to think about changing the name to X-Women." So, Jay, why don't you start?
Kick it over to Jay.
What do you think of that quote?
It is funny because, you know, growing up as a comic book fan and loving the X-Men and not reading a bunch of the comics as much as I've said this a million times on this series, but I mainly watched the TV show. I didn't read as many of the comics. I had never gave it a second thought that it was called X-Men.
Yeah.
Like, it just didn't occur to me. But in 2019, it does feel a little odd that it was so on the nose with that because, like, the female characters, I would not, if you would have asked me who were some of the central characters on the X-Men, Rogue would have been right up there near the top because of that TV show loved Rogue. So therefore, I loved Rogue, you know?
Yeah.
So I didn't I didn't distinguish the two when I was a kid. I didn't think like, oh, well, this is like great for males, but not great for females.
Yeah.
Jubilee was a big part of that show. Jean Grey showed up in that show from time to time, but you know,
Storm,
Wolverine, Storm was great. But I do think it is. I think anytime you look at things in retrospect, you put a certain cultural filter on it for the time of our lives that it occurs in, and it is awkward to look back and think that it's just called X-Men. You know, like it's odd. It's a strange thing. I think that the line, the way it's delivered, feels a little bit like they're placating that particular issue.
Yeah.
But I didn't mind it, and it made me pause and go like, oh yeah, that is kind of weird that it's called X-Men, you know? But I don't tend to think. I like to be a person who I'm watching The Boys right now on Amazon, and I like the deconstruction of superhero stuff. I like to dig deeper into why we like it, why we dislike it, what it means in our lives. And so I think that we're always going to look back at what was done in the 60s and what was decided on by people in the 60s and go like, that's kind of awkward now. So I'm not necessarily like, oh, we've got to change it tomorrow. But at the same time, it is pretty weird that it's named that. So, you know.
Well, I'm looking it up. X-Men comic came out in 1963.
Yeah, so there you go.
And if you're familiar with it, Jean Grey was the only female member of that. And I doubt the Avengers were. Maybe the Avengers were around then, and they definitely didn't have a female character unless Wasp was there early on. But
yeah,
I don't remember her being a part of that.
I don't either.
Yeah, and so yeah, I mean, it was a term that came up in the 60s. It was the copyright registered term.
right.
So it's kind of hard to change it. And then what do you change it to? You know.
Yeah.
You know, and what the movie first came out in 2000. So you know, that's what people knew.
Yeah.
And this was essentially X-Men was basically the first team superhero movie.
Yeah.
And so, that's what people are familiar with. So it is a cultural term.
It is. And it would be interesting to see. I'm glad you bring that up because it would be really interesting to travel back in time and look at the demographic makeup of people reading comics in the 60s.
Yeah.
Because
even 70s, 80s.
Right.
90s.
Yeah. It's. I think that if I had to guess, it would be predominantly young male.
Mm-hmm.
I would say that's still true today.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know that there's a lot more females that read
a giant love of geek culture.
Yes.
Yeah.
But the amount of people that actually extend that to going and buying comics and sitting down and reading them, probably still mostly male.
I can tell you, when I went to comic conventions in the 80s, I wasn't there to pick up women. I mean, there were definitely women fans. I do know, like, my first comic book store was run by a husband and wife team, and the wife was just as much into comic books as the husband was. But again, I wasn't there to meet women either.
Right, exactly. And I think the point I'm trying to make too is, and I think all of us are trying to make is comics are as much for females as they are for males. I'm not trying to make
especially today.
But especially today. But what I'm just saying is that if you were writing comics in 1963, you probably were thinking, I'm writing for Billy down the street who's 10. Yeah. And that's who I'm writing this comic for. Yeah. So then you thought, well, what's Billy going to grow up to be? A man, so X-Men. You know what I mean? Like, it's just one of those things where they probably didn't think much beyond that because they didn't have much exposure beyond that.
Yeah. I mean, when I bought the Hellfire Club issue, it was 40 cents.
Yeah.
That's not a lot of money for a comic book. And they did rely on heavy sales. And so, obviously, as greedy as publishing is, they're going to appeal to the group that's going to go out and buy those. And at that time, it was little boys and teen boys as well. One thing that I'll say about that comment, agreeing with what we've said so far, the comment when it appeared in the movie felt out of context. To say, I get the part where she says, "When was the last time you were the one risking something?" is true. It's the idea that Xavier sent these kids out to save the space shuttle.
Right.
But when she says the women are the ones saving the men, and I'm like, well, I just saw an entire sequence where I didn't necessarily see the women do something that the men weren't doing in that rescue mission. And so when she says it, I have nothing to refer to validate what she is saying. And that was my problem. It just felt like it was.
In fact, in that scene in space, I seem to remember the one doing the most risking was actually Kurt, wasn't it?
And Quicksilver.
They were the ones jumping out there trying to save.
Yeah, Kurt went back twice.
Yeah.
And then Rogue, she was piloting the space shuttle, the ship, the plane.
Mystique, you mean?
Yeah, Mystique.
Yeah.
And Mystique. She was the one piloting the jet and giving orders. Yeah. So she was. She was the team leader, definitely. Yeah. But, I didn't necessarily see her powers at work.
Right. So maybe another question, a follow-up question, would be, would you change the name now in 2019 from X-Men to something else?
Okay, so let me throw my thoughts out first.
Yeah.
First of all, granted, I'm on the male side of this, so I fit within the demographic of the name already. So I recognize that.
Right.
But I've always sort of taken that name as an evolutionary term. Sort of like mankind,
Sure.
Like the Apollo landing, like one small step for man, giant leap for mankind. Like, no one's complaining that it didn't say women or womenkind. It's an all-encompassing term.
Yeah.
So that's kind of how I've always taken it. I do like that these movies are seeking to further female representation.
Yeah.
I'm totally behind that.
Yeah.
I think this particular effort falls incredibly flat. Because, like Alan says, I don't think they supported it with the movie leading up to that point.
Right.
I think having the character that we knew was about to die played by the most checked out actor in the franchise
saying this
takes a lot of steam away from it.
Right.
Right. And so I think it does come across as just kind of weak and placating and doesn't really get anything done.
Yeah.
So
I'm trying to think in the Marvel universe what other hero teams have the name man in it or men. Avengers. Well, that could be men and women.
anything,
Defenders could be
Yeah.
men and women. It's just interesting that it's this one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It is weird that it's this one. I don't think I'd have any. See, I like deconstruction. I like revisionist type things. So I would have no problem if they just rebranded it as something else.
Yeah.
Now, I think that I wouldn't want them to do it because they got pressure to be PC. Because I'm like, don't just do the PC thing. That's stupid. But I think there's a rationale enough to change it. It makes sense to me to change it. So it would be kind of interesting. I mean, what if Disney changes it? I'd be like, okay, I'm cool with that.
Well, when Kevin Feige did the Hall H presentation at Comic-Con,
yeah.
he didn't say X-Men, he said mutants.
That's
now he has
true.
since in an interview said, "Don't read into that."
Yeah.
That there's nothing being. He's like, don't make
Does
a
he
big
not
deal out of that.
understand the internet?
Yeah.
Of course we're going to read
But
into it.
if you think about it in the context of the MCU, why are they called the X-Men? They're called the X-Men because of Charles Xavier, right?
Right.
And that's called out in the film.
Yes,
that's
exactly.
right,
yep.
Based on the G-Men thing, right?
Yep,
They're
yep,
the
yep.
X-Men instead. And in the MCU,
Oh, I never made that connection.
yeah,
The G-Men and X-Men.
yeah.
Interesting.
Well, they say it in First Class too.
Oh, did they really?
Yeah.
I just missed it.
And I think there were a lot of other teams that always had man or men in the title that were not necessarily comic related, but
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
That makes sense.
the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen.
Yeah.
They might have been all men. I don't remember.
No, I think there was a token female.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just
But,
to play nice, I guess.
I do think it would be interesting if the MCU went the mutants route instead of the X-Men route,
Yeah.
and took not so much for gender equality, but to take the focus off of Charles
Yeah.
and
yeah,
give
yeah.
us a break from Charles Xavier.
perhaps
Yeah.
more.
Well, that goes
Cyclops?
into the question of if when mutants come, will it be an Xavier story?
Yeah,
Yeah.
And that's what I like is they don't necessarily have to do that.
I
Yeah,
know.
Totally. Totally.
and I kind of don't want them to do
Yeah.
that because we've been getting that for.
You want them to do a Scott Summers story.
I do. Yes, I want Scott Summers to get a real movie.
Yeah.
I mean, one thing like Spider-Man, the Spider-Man series, you'll notice that they have yet to repeat a villain.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, they're just willing to push and say we've told
Yeah.
the Green Goblin story.
Yep.
Don't need to do that anymore.
That's a great example. That's really good.
Yeah.
Because Batman keeps drawing from the same wells.
The Joker again?
Over and over and over. Yeah.
Joker.
Now we have two Jokers and they're both two different people.
That's right.
That's what the people want.
Oh boy.
Speaking of Charles, though, so okay. So you asked, should it change today?
Yeah. Should have changed.
Um,
I mean,
I
you kind of answered it. You said let's just call them mutants. Why do we have to call them?
I think that would be cool.
Yeah.
I still feel like the whole evolutionary term thing kind of fits and still is okay. I don't know if there's a lot of... I could be totally wrong. I haven't researched this. I haven't sought anybody's opinion, but
Yeah.
I haven't heard a lot of backlash to the name X-Men in the comics.
No, I haven't either.
So,
I haven't heard anybody
Yeah.
complain
I
about
mean,
it. but-
all the main stories have always been A versus X. Always,
Yeah.
and X is the letter that signifies mutants.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And again, it depends on what they decide the story they're going to approach with.
Right.
It would seem weird to me to all of a sudden have a movie that starts with a school.
Yeah.
It seems like that they may go in a more, a different direction, a more
Yes.
intriguing direction.
I can tell you one way that they could definitely piss people off.
What's that?
Replace Xavier with Wolverine
Uh-huh.
and call the team the W Men.
Yeah, that'd be bad.
That's a definite failure right there for sure.
That's pretty good. Did you just come up with that?
I did, yes.
Then I am impressed.
I haven't been stewing on that one all day. Trust me. Okay, so one of the big things in this movie is Charles and the information that he kept from Jean about her father and about her childhood and the struggle about whether or not he was right to do that. So just real simply here, Alan, we'll start with you. Do you think Charles was wrong to keep the truth from Jean?
Yeah, this one I'm kind of conflicted. I mean, in as a general life principle, hiding the truth is generally a bad idea.
Yeah.
And especially in movies, when you hide the truth, it is a really bad idea. People get killed, and in this one, that definitely happens. it's just this. It's just the truth will set you free.
Yeah.
The sooner you understand the truth about your life, and is the sooner you're able to cope with it. And then when you go into adulthood, you've dealt with the issues, and now this is a part of your life and the fabric of who you are, as opposed to finding out as an adult, and then questioning your entire life before that.
Yeah.
There's a movie that just came out, documentary called Origin Story, and it's
about Scott Aukerman's wife.
Yeah, Scott Aukerman's wife, Kulap Velicek or something like that. And at 14, she in a heated family fight, she discovers that her father, the man she knew as her father, was not her biological father.
Oh, no way.
And for her, it was just kind of a complete meltdown moment for a teenager.
Yeah.
And because it calls into question her entire life.
Right.
Her relationship with her mother, her relationship with her then father, her sisters who don't look like her.
Right.
Her close family friend who sponsored them when they came from Laos.
Wow.
They were in on the lie too.
Yeah.
So everyone she's known her entire life had been lying to her up until this point. And again, this is not something you want to put on a person, because the thing is, the people who are telling the lie, after the lie is exposed, they're fine.
Right.
They can still go on with life.
Yeah.
It's the one who just discovered the lie. Now they have to deal with all the psychological, emotional, stuff that comes around that.
Exactly.
And in this case, many people died in Dark Phoenix.
Right.
No, not in Collapse.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't think I can disagree with any of that. I think one of the reasons why you probably say you're conflicted, Alan, is that I think there are times when it might be healthier to reveal things to people in, like, if that had been revealed to the lady you're talking about at a different time, not during a fight, not during this kind of, it might still turn your life upside down, but not in the same way, right? It might. You can invite people into the truth as opposed to like clobbering them over the head with it, which it sounds like she was going to clobber over the head with it. So I don't know if I think he's definitely wrong from hiding the truth from her. There's no question about that. But if there was a point in her life where she literally couldn't deal with what the truth was, I feel like he could have made that easier for her to take. Maybe it's like, let me tell you a little bit about the truth, and then as you get older, I'll start revealing more to you. That seems like it might have been a wise thing to do, but he just doesn't even go there. So I think that's the problem.
I'll give you a great example that my daughter is adopted.
Oh, yeah.
We adopted her from Korea. And from the very beginning, we made sure she knew that this is not something we were going to sit down at one point and say, hey.
Yeah, totally.
There's something we need to tell you.
No,
it's just, this is how our family came together, and she's understood that up until this point.
Right.
And now she's beginning to have questions about her family, her birth family, and the events relating to that. And we're able to talk with her about that in a non-yelling fashion.
Yeah, exactly.
And a non-fiery death for everybody around.
You're not my real father.
And that sounds like a really healthy way of doing it. So it feels like Charles could have done something more that way,
Yeah, I mean, I think he was trying to protect her
Yeah.
as a little girl. But at some point, she wasn't a little girl anymore. And he should have recognized that. I think he was definitely just afraid of the truth at some point.
Yeah, I mean, I don't blame him for what he did, to block the fact that she killed her mother, and that her father doesn't want her anymore, and and is basically has in his mind killed her too, and that's fairly traumatic, and I don't blame Charles for necessarily doing it, but there could have been a better way to expose the lie.
Right, exactly. Well, I think that one of the things that this movie does very interestingly is it talks about Charles in a way that we went back to the ex-women comment, and it feels like Charles in these films has been pretty patriarchal. but he's not mature enough to be patriarchal. Yeah. We know he's not mature enough, but he still acts like I've got it all. He acts like the boss in Mad Men, right? Like where it's just kind of like, well, you're not mature enough to know this, and it's like,
which is so confusing because at some point he has to evolve into literally a perfect human being that is Patrick Stewart.
Right, exactly.
And he's nowhere on that path.
No, he's not even close. So I think it's particularly troubling coming from a guy who can't even keep his own life together, right? And it does feel a lot more patriarchal. It does feel a lot more. It doesn't feel like wisdom. When you see old Charles, you feel like, okay, he's doing wiser things. Young Charles feels like he's doing things to control other people, to make them fit the mold that he wants them to fit, and that's just not a good look for anybody. So, it works from that perspective.
Yeah, I agree. I do love the struggle of it in this film. I love the scene where Hank and Charles are in the kitchen. And Hank is pleading with him. He's like, just admit you were wrong, please. Yeah. Like,
that's a great scene.
That's probably one of my favorite scenes in any of the X-Men films.
Yeah, it's a really good scene.
I don't know. Yes, but there's a moment where he slams the glasses on the table. I'm like, oh. Okay.
Too far.
Yeah, he's angry. I
get it. Okay, let's talk about Raven a bit. I said before that he was the most checked out actor in this franchise.
Yeah.
There's a long, troubled history with Jennifer Lawrence in this franchise. Like, she got too famous for it, but she still has to do it. And now she's, like, not quite as famous anymore, but she's got this one, and then they kill her off, and blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, right.
But, so Raven's accidentally killed by Jean very early in this film. In fact, in the trailer for this film, which was a strange choice. And that motivates Eric and Hank to seek revenge against Jean. So this is the death of a female character for the sake of the emotional arc of male characters.
Right.
Which in many circles, especially in geek storytelling, is considered fridging.
That's right.
Which, just as a quick review, we've talked about this before, but if people don't know what fridging is, it harkens back to a Green Lantern comic from the 90s when Kyle Rayner found his girlfriend brutally killed and her body stuffed into a fridge, only for the sake of advancing his emotional journey.
Right.
And it's since become a problem in storytelling where they're just killing female characters for the sake of the emotional journey of the male characters.
Yeah, Deadpool 2 would be an example.
Exactly. Yes.
Exactly.
I mean, Daryl, did you see Once Upon a Deadpool?
Yes.
Okay, so they actually call it out.
Yeah.
And Once Upon a Deadpool.
Like, proudly.
It's like, so you fridged Vanessa. He goes, what?
Yeah.
You literally fridged Vanessa.
Yeah.
That's hilarious.
So my question is that what's happening here, or is this something deeper?
It's not.
So... Well, go ahead.
I'll just
go for it.
It's not. The fridging. The term fridging refers to an overt act of murdering a woman to set the emotional arc of the film. Part of it is this happens halfway through the film, so it doesn't happen in the beginning. And two, there's a convenience level that it's Mystique.
Yeah.
And three. Neither had a love affair with her. It was basically a friend who died. So you literally could have replaced it with Scott, with some other characters, beloved characters, well, and still gotten the same emotional response. That's my feeling.
Maybe not out of Eric though, because Eric doesn't care about Scott.
Yeah,
probably not as much.
But what I'm saying is, it literally could have been anyone else. It made the most sense that it was Mystique versus any other member of the team that Jean could have killed.
Yeah, I don't disagree that it's fridging at all. I agree that it's fridging. Is it something deeper? I think only in relationship to the fact that Eric and Hank were the closest to her, and now they're the ones seeking revenge. Could you have replaced her with somebody else and had two other characters seeking revenge? Yeah, totally. Like.
You could have replaced her with somebody else and had the exact same two characters seeking revenge in a much more powerful way.
Yeah. Which character?
But it would have been a big move.
Which one's that?
Charles.
Oh, Charles. Yeah. Sure. Yeah.
But I think it had to do more with the relationship versus the gender.
Yeah.
No one had a romantic relationship with Mystique, but they had a
Hank
deep
sort of
connection.
did.
Kind of, but
he wanted one.
Yeah.
He has a crush on her.
Yeah.
But it was really the culmination of their interpersonal relationship versus a romantic one.
Yeah.
I mean, Eric, it was his friend. For Charles, it was his sister, basically.
Right.
And again, that it wasn't necessarily gratuitous. That event had to happen, and I guess, yeah. I mean, that's why I just don't feel like it's fridging in the sense of the Me Too type angle of it.
Yeah, I think so. If you're a female fan and you're listening to this, I would like to hear your opinion. You can write in thestorygeeks@gmail.com and let me know what you think. I think fridging is a problem primarily because it's done so often.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
it's not necessarily like, so if you said we're going to further one character's development by taking them through a traumatic event in regards to somebody that they love, that's not a problem from a storytelling perspective. That's a way to get a character going along their arc. The problem is that it is historically a female character, and the male character, a lot of times the male character who feels like they were wanting to be a guardian or a protector of that particular female character, that's the problem, is that it's so overdone. It's not that it's like offensive just because it happened. It's because it's offensive because it's happened over and over and over and over and over and over again. And we talked about in the 60s, there probably not being as many female comics fans. Well, as female comic fans have started to go up in percentage related to male fans, they're looking at the same comics going, why do our favorite characters always get fridged? And that's the problem, is that they haven't found representation. The only representation they have is getting chopped up and putting in refrigerators. And they're going, can you give us somebody that does something better than that? And I think that in this case, Mystique has historically done a lot better than that and been instrumental to the series. So it's not quite like, oh, well, here's a character where we told you the male loved, and therefore the male's going to be distraught about it. This character has a little bit more going for her. She has a little bit more of a background, and so that when she is killed, there's more going on there. So I can see that your argument. I would still probably call it fridging by the definition of the word, but that definition of the word, I think, it's not really fair. It's not really totally fair to every story, and so you got to use it You got to use it carefully.
Yeah. I don't know that I would necessarily say, here's a great example of fridging.
Exactly.
Dark Phoenix.
Exactly right.
And
exactly
then you mentioned one thing. The reason it's a problem is because it's a story trope that's told over and over again. But another story trope that's told over and over again of when there's an actor who doesn't want to be in a series anymore, they kill off that actor.
Right.
Unless that actor's name is Harrison Ford.
Then they just keep making him do more stuff. That's hilarious. What did you think, Daryl?
I for the record, I agree. I don't think technically it is fridging here, but it made a good question, right?
Yeah.
But here's where I think the danger lies, because I agree. I think Mystique is a strong enough and important enough character throughout the course of the franchise.
Yes.
To where that doesn't qualify here, because I think her character did have strength. In this film, in and of itself, she does not.
Right.
So if this is somebody's first X-Men film,
yeah,
then that could be an issue. And I think the fact that they put it in the trailers and sort of sold the movie based on it was an odd choice. I'm like,
come see our movie about fridging.
Yeah. So I don't think it is. I want to give more credit to Simon Kinberg than that.
Yeah.
I've seen so many things where Simon Kinberg is stepping up and saying, "Yep, it's my fault. I take responsibility for what a crap
X3.
show the Dark Phoenix is." And I'm like,
really?
I'm like, dude, don't do that.
Yeah,
you made a good movie. Like,
Yeah.
don't let these people stomp all over you.
Yeah,
I want him to stand up for himself.
Yeah.
So I don't think he was seeking to tell a story about fridging, but I think the marketing and some of that stuff certainly didn't help carry the truth of what they were really trying to do across.
Right.
Yeah, I just to end it, but there's a difference between killing a character and killing a woman. This was a character that they chose to die, and the fridging just, I get it, and I think it's a bad practice.
Yeah.
But in order to tell stories effectively, you've got to make extreme decisions like this.
Yes.
And unfortunately, Mystique is a female.
Yeah. Exactly.
I thought this is totally off topic, but I saw someone make a collage of how Mystique has looked over the course of the franchise.
Yeah.
And in the first film, it's like this massive prosthetics, like really, really well done, heavy makeup job.
Yeah.
And in this movie, it kind of just looks like they painted her face blue.
Really?
And gave her a few
Yeah.
freckles.
Oh, no.
It's so different.
Well, you consider the X costume is a full bodysuit.
yeah, it's like they didn't have to do all that anymore.
And you know, she only used her powers once in the movie.
Is that right?
Yeah, when they came back from the mission and the team's in front of the students.
Yeah.
Just before Xavier talks, she turns into normal Jennifer Lawrence.
Well, Stryker wasn't in this movie, right? And she spends half the rest of the franchise pretending to be Stryker. So it's like, if he's not in this one, what is she supposed to do? Okay. In all the other X-Men films, Charles and Eric's relationship is at the center of the story, and it is here too. So Jay, we'll start with you on this, but how do you feel their dynamic carries through in this movie? And how do you feel about where their journey ends up at the conclusion? Does it even feel like a conclusion?
Okay. I like the dynamic. I've said this. I say this almost every episode on this series. My favorite dynamic is when those two are like frenemies, where their ideologies are at war with one another, but they still are sort of friends. That's like the best setup you can have, like two ideologies pitted against one another like that, because both of them make sense in certain contexts, and especially when they make Charles more of a bad guy as opposed to Charles being like the altruistic good guy in every case. It's really fascinating. I really like it. The reality is, however this film ends kind of doesn't matter anymore. So you just have to look at it as, like you said, like a one shot, right? Like this is a one shot. Did you like it? Did you not like it? And I feel like it doesn't necessarily resolve a lot of things, but it just kind of reminds us that they're going to stay frenemies, which is essential to their characters. If they all of a sudden become just mortal enemies, it doesn't make sense anymore. It's not fun anymore. The whole context that this is happening in, it doesn't work the same way. So as long as they end a film playing chess together, I'm cool with that. You know what I mean? Especially if they're kind of at odds with how to deal with the problem, which I think is one of the best ways to treat those two characters. So,
yeah. So when I was preparing for that question, that was my impetus to go see the movie for a third time. And because I couldn't remember what they did together.
Yeah.
And I'm like, did I miss something? Because I remember them playing chess, but and then I watched it and realized, no, I didn't miss anything. I mean, because the two were relatively separate for the majority of the film, and when they were together, it was in an intense situation, whether it was going after Jean at the house or on the train.
And the action scene that Scott Nicewander said was a super long action scene where people are simply trying to cross the street.
That's right.
Yeah, exactly.
15 minutes.
That was a great scene. Yeah, and if they had a conversation, it was probably just Charles going, "Eric, don't. Don't
You're
do
better
this.
than
You're
this,
better
Eric.
than this. I
There's
got
good in you. I can feel
killed
it."
Mystique. Yeah, I mean, so when you talk about their relationship, I'm like, it reminded me just how much I'm not a fan of McAvoy's portrayal of Xavier.
Okay.
I mean,
is it more McAvoy specific, or is it more the way that the writers have written?
it's the way
character?
it's written.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, he's a good choice.
Yeah.
He can fake that New England accent very well. But this idea that I feel like they made him just a little too wimpy, and then at the same time, I don't necessarily buy the villainous aspect of Xavier in this film. The idea that he would send a team of mutant heroes out into space to save the space shuttle, that seems to me what the X-Men did.
Yeah.
That's what I would have read in the comic books.
Right.
He's trying to bridge that gap between Homo sapiens and Homo superiors.
Yeah.
He's been trying to do this his entire life.
Right.
And so they're putting kind of a negative spin on that, which I just didn't quite buy in this.
Yeah.
So when you ask this relationship between Charles and Eric, it really didn't exist for me in this film.
Yeah.
It's dealt much better in the past ones. And as for a third time we'll say, this is that one-off issue.
Yeah.
But we just didn't need to explore that. And I don't think they explored it well. I don't think they explored it in, because it probably didn't fall in the storyline overall.
You just made me realize something, actually, that I had not realized before. And that's, a lot of people have talked about they like showing the weakness of Charles, especially when he's younger, right? And I've liked that too, but it's always made me feel a little bit uncomfortable. And I just realized what it is hearing you talk about it. It's that I like to hear about the weakness of a human being, the fatal flaw of a character, if you will. But I don't like for them to try and poke holes at that character's ideology, associating it with the character's weakness. Yeah. And that's the one problem I would say that Xavier has in these newer films, is that he's not wrong ideologically. He's wrong in his human failures trying to accomplish his ideology. The problem is that when we see Fassbender as Magneto, they give him lots of reasons to be the way that he is. Yeah. And so we kind of go, Magneto's awesome and makes sense. Whereas you look at Charles and you go, oh man, is he doing the right thing? And the answer is no, not in these not in the battles, but in the overall war, he has the right perspective. And I didn't realize how much I was struggling with that part of it until you mentioned that. So that's cool.
Yeah, there's something wimpy about peace, I guess.
That's right.
And quite frankly, we're seeing that.
Well,
today
that is the
in
premise
real
of all superhero stories, right?
Yeah,
I know. I mean, we want to get along, but we're not. So.
I totally agree with Alan. I don't think their relationship. I wrote the question, and I said their relationship is at the center of the story, but I actually don't think it is. I think they're trying to present it to us as if it is.
Trick question.
Yeah.
Wrong.
But it really is just a whole bunch of there's good in you, Eric. It's basically like the Luke and Vader relationship without the
all right,
father.
we get it.
But,
Yeah.
But I did really, really enjoy the dynamic of the relationship between Charles and Hank in this film, which I know I've already said that in this episode, but and I went back and watched all the other X-Men films in preparation for our series after seeing Dark Phoenix.
Yeah.
And that's part of what I looked for, is that this one reminded me of the coolness between Charles and Hank. And I went back and watched all the other ones with that frame of reference.
Okay.
And you really see it really well in Days of Future Past, too. Especially when Logan first comes to find Charles and kind of where Hank and Charles are at now. Yeah. Super interesting.
Yeah.
But it doesn't feel like this really does conclude Charles and Eric's story. Partially because obviously I don't think they believed they had to at the time when they were making the movie.
And I guess my point is it should never conclude. Like, as soon as you conclude Charles and Eric's story, you take away a lot of, if you don't give sub characters their ideologies to wrestle with, it's not fun anymore. Well, I guess it's not. It's fun. It just doesn't have the same weight to it.
Yeah.
Yeah, the comic books have always dealt with that.
Exactly.
Where, it's like one moment Eric's good.
Yep.
He's running the X-Men. At the moment, he snaps back into his old ways.
Right. Exactly.
I don't know though. Knowing that this is the last one, I think I would have liked to see some
more of a conclusion.
Because normally I would agree with you. I think if you have a dynamic between two characters that feeds into your storytelling so well, you don't want to conclude it. Yeah. But sometimes there come points, usually when it's forced. Yeah. Like in this case, this was the last film. Another one that's fresh in my mind because I just watched it today, and go with me on this because it's not going to sound like a good argument to begin with, but is Fast and Furious 7.
Okay.
So, and no matter what you think of those movies, I love those movies. I recognize, I know they're ridiculous, but I love them. No matter what you think of them, this is the film in which Dominic Toretto and Brian O'Connor's story concludes.
That's right.
Because Paul Walker died during the production of it.
Right.
And they chose to end his story in a happy way rather than just killing him off in the movie and stuff like that, which was beautiful. And I actually really, really like that. I know it was forced upon them, but I think from a storytelling perspective, they did a really good job with it. So I think it can be done well.
Oh, yeah. So don't get me wrong. It can be done well. I don't know if it could have been done well in this film. Like, for example, I think it was done well with Tony Stark.
Yes.
Right? Like, he concludes really, really
Why?
well.
What happened to Tony Stark?
No. Yeah,
Are we spoiling it?
We're spoiling everything
talking
always.
about?
I think that's done
Did you guys
really,
see
really
Endgame
well.
yet?
By the way, it came out on digital, I think, today, didn't it?
What did? I'm just
kidding.
But my point being that that was the MCU. It was leading up to that. There was a bunch of backstory. You could almost make the argument that every single X-Men film is a one shot. It's like they're not really tied together in like a super cohesive. The two most tied together films are probably X-Men and X2, or First Class and Days of Future Past.
Yeah.
I mean, other than that, it's just a bunch of random X-Men films.
Yeah.
I mean, I will say this
with people that don't age from 10 years to 10 years to 10 years.
Right.
I mean, I will say that I don't think people thought that this was the last X-Men movie. I think the only certain thing was Jennifer Lawrence wasn't coming back.
Yeah.
Because the Disney deal really didn't get serious until clearly the film was in post-production.
True.
And they got that. They probably, I wouldn't be surprised if that last scene was added at the end.
Oh, maybe.
But, so I don't necessarily know that you could say, well, it's the last one. They knew it was the last one.
Right. No, I don't think they did. Yeah.
I think they were hopeful that.
But we knew it was the last one.
Pretty
As
much.
viewers.
When we were watching it,
yeah,
we knew. Yeah, we were aware. This is all it's going to be until Disney gets a hold of it.
Yeah.
What's up, Story Geeks? It's Jay. New this week, the Kindle version of Timeslingers, the time travel novel written by me and illustrated by Nathan Sheck, is now available on Amazon.com. And special thanks to all the folks that have been reviewing it and purchasing it. If you haven't purchased it yet, please do so now. It's only 99 cents on Kindle for a limited time. And it currently has 4.5 out of 5 stars from over 45 reviewers. It's even been flirting with being in the top 100 time travel and alternate history books on Kindle. If you're looking for a fast-paced time travel adventure story, check out Timeslingers. It's only 99 cents on Kindle for a limited time. Like I said, please go buy it and then give us a review. It's really important that we hit 100 reviews, and we're almost halfway there. The link to purchase Timeslingers is in the show notes. Special thanks to everyone who has supported this release. We really appreciate you.
Originally, my next question was going to be, how do you feel about Jessica Chastain's villain, Vuk? I think I'm going to reword it to, do you feel about Jessica Chastain's villain, Vuk?
Well, here, I'll give you a little history.
All right.
So,
Good.
because I got to see it for a third time.
I wasn't aware there was some.
Yeah, actually,
Bring it
this
on.
is going to be interesting because I did get to see it for a third time in a theater that had nobody in it. I was able to take notes. And in the beginning of the film, she talks with her other alien brothers, and she talks about being from the Dabari Empire.
Oh, yeah.
And if you are familiar with the Dabari Empire, which I was not until I looked it up, Dabari
I
Empire.
still am not.
Yeah, so the Dabari Empire, the home world was a moon that when Jean Grey went full Dark Phoenix, that moon, Jean Grey had basically destroyed that moon and destroyed the entire Dabari Empire. And so these are the aliens from that empire.
Okay.
So just a little comic book background.
Little backstory. Yeah.
Little backstory. And how consequential was that to this movie? No, not much.
Yeah.
I mean, clearly the character of Vuk, which is a comic book character.
It is.
Yes.
Ah.
And it's it was a device to tell the Dark Phoenix story, basically.
Yeah.
Because this is the first real introduction of aliens into the X-Men, and conveniently, this is an alien that sucks the essence out of people, which fits in line with the storyline of what they're trying to tell with Dark Phoenix.
Definitely is an alien that sucks.
I mean, the reality is, I think Jessica Chastain is a great actress. But this is kind of, for me, what Cate Blanchett was to Thor Ragnarok. It was kind of like a disappointment because somebody has the ability. Like you take Jennifer Lawrence, right, who just doesn't feel like she wants to be there at all. You contrast that with like Sophie Turner, who is amazing in this film, I think.
Yeah.
And then you look at Jessica Chastain and you go, oh, obviously she's going to be more Sophie Turner, right? And I do think that she actually cared about it. When she was doing press tour stuff, she seemed like she really cared about this character. But there's nothing to care about in the film about this character.
I think literally she didn't know who her character was going to be when the movie came out.
Yeah, because she had no idea
I don't
how
think
many
she shot
shoots
the
they
movie
did and
as
stuff.
Vuk. I think they changed that. Personally.
Yeah. It's
I-
very possible.
I mean, it did surprise me as the movie was going on that, oh, this is the role they gave Jessica Chastain.
Yeah.
exactly.
You know,
exactly.
I mean, you literally could have given that to an up-and-coming actress.
totally.
Like Kate Blanchett.
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, like you said,
Would have
I
been
just
a
feel
hell
like
of a good time. A hella good time.
Man,
Sorry.
that one.
Not so good?
no, people.
Nah,
People.
I mean, I will say I did like Kate Blanchett as in her hella good role.
Well, I did too, but I like her in the role, but they didn't give her much to do.
Yeah.
I felt like.
Well, yeah, and if you know you're gonna have an actress for one film,
Yeah.
yeah, so why not put her in a good meaty role and kill her off at the end?
I'm always for meteor roles,
It's
whatever
just,
the case.
It's just this one was, and there was at least some meat to Hella as well. This one is just again to serve the plot of the overall other story.
Yeah.
because this is really not about the aliens. This is about about Jean Grey. This is about her
Exactly.
adventure,
Exactly.
her transformation.
Right.
And so yeah, it just felt like if you're gonna get someone of the quality of Jessica Chastain,
Yeah.
this is not what I would have thought. And she must have done it for a favor.
Yeah.
Someone on that cast or crew must have been a really good friend.
Probably.
Yeah.
I will say though that just in the comparison to Ragnarok, I don't feel that like that movie is about Hela either. I feel like it's about Thor getting away from the Grand Master, in my opinion.
Yeah, but
like Hela is just like almost like a side quest by the end of it.
But the thing was, that was a meaty role. I mean, there was depth in that character.
Yeah.
That this one clearly didn't.
Oh,
have.
there's no depth in this character whatsoever, which is a bummer because, like you said, Jessica Chastain. To your point, Jessica Chastain, great actress, could do amazing things in a comic book role. Maybe we should cast her in some other roles on the Aftercast.
Maybe we will.
Oh, I didn't write that one.
I was really frustrated with this because I love Jessica Chastain, and I actually really enjoyed watching her in this movie.
Yeah.
I thought her performance was actually really cool and really interesting and really eerie.
Sure.
It's just the character meant nothing to me. Like,
Right.
it's just there was nothing behind it.
Yeah.
And so it was doubly frustrating because I'm like, well, I'm enjoying watching her do her job,
Yeah.
but it's pointless.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's that moment where she's talking with Jean about the potential of her power, and I just felt like that should have been deeper and richer that discussion. And I mean, she did a great job with it, but it again, it's just that role.
Yeah.
And again, the marketing, like they marketed her.
I thought it was Emma
Jessica
Frost.
Chastain. Yeah,
I thought it was Emma Frost for a moment there.
which would have been cool to have
Yeah,
a third actress
absolutely.
play Emma Frost in the
I
X-Men
know.
films franchise.
But at least Emma Frost would have made sense in the Dark Phoenix saga.
yeah, that's true. And they were so mysterious about who her character was in the marketing. They were like, Jessica Chastain in a mysterious role.
Yeah.
So you built it up in your mind. You're like, oh, what's it gonna be?
It's
Like-
Vuk.
Oh, it's nothing.
Even we don't know.
Yeah.
yeah.
It's Vuk. Come on, guys. Nerds, come on. Vuk.
All right. Speaking of characters, let's talk about the other characters. Which characters do you think get the best story, get the best arcs in this film, and which ones do you think are the most underserved? Alan, why don't you kick it
Clearly, it's Jean Grey, in terms of the best story in the film. I mean, it's her story. But I will say this: the reality is that Jean Grey, Scott Summers, Nightcrawler, they were all introduced in Age of Apocalypse, which was the movie before this one. And so, my frustration was, the Scott, Jean, the Wolverine triangle there. Well, if you take the Scott and Jean aspect of it, it really hadn't been that developed at all. It just shows up in this movie as the two of them, in a relationship. And, at that point, it's like, I just don't feel it. I don't feel that these two are.
Well, it's been 10 years since the last one. Didn't it look like it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, Scott still looks like a kid.
Yeah.
So in terms of the best story, I mean, Jean. I think Sophie Turner was great in the role.
Yeah.
I think she knew what, it was a lot of it was on her. and her emotional transformation, and then really the supporting characters around her to create that, build that arc there. On the other hand, Scott, I mean, Scott, I guess comic fans have this love-hate relationship with Scott Summers. I mean, they really love to hate him. And this one just doesn't do him that much good. I mean, even as a leader, people can't stand Scott Summers as the leader of the X-Men, but he is. And this one, they just didn't really develop him at all. And, he was the boyfriend. And again, I didn't quite get it. And if I were to go to some other minor character, I finally liked seeing Nightcrawler. Nightcrawler was probably my favorite X-Men, as a kid. And to find, Alan Cummings was good, but he wasn't in it much.
Yeah.
In this one, you see him a little bit more. And then, when he becomes this little rage monster at the end, at least, it's kind of good. I got my Nightcrawler fix in this one.
Yeah. I would agree. Sophie Turner makes the role compelling to me. I don't know that a lot of other actresses could have made this role as compelling as Sophie Turner made it too. I really enjoyed seeing her in this role in this film. So that's one of my favorites as well. I can watch Fassbender in a terrible movie. Apocalypse is a terrible movie. Mm-hmm. The more I think about it, the worse it gets. But I could still watch him just be Magneto and be pretty satisfied with his performance because he's so there with it. So I think he actually has. The story's not even really about him, but whenever he's on screen, I'm just compelled. Like when I said this before, but when he's pulling the helicopter and Jean is like trying to mess with the helicopters, he's just so into standing in a field with a bunch of extras around, acting
putting
like
his
he's
arms out.
Yeah, putting his arms out, and you're like, this guy cares enough about this stupid looking thing that he's doing that it sells it. I totally believe that he's fighting her for a helicopter that doesn't exist. You know what I mean? So I love that. I love the fact that at the end he puts up all the guns. He's like controlling all the guns in the train. Amazing. But of course, there's a lot of underserved people. Scott Summers, like you mentioned, is underserved. I agree with Alan that I really liked Nightcrawler in this film. I actually really like that actor as Nightcrawler too. I don't know what it is. I know that I think it was Captain Midnight that was saying that he really liked the Alan Cummings.
Yeah.
And I don't hate that or anything, but I just like this. Yeah. This kid fits it better for me for whatever reason, right? So I like that. Yeah, but underserved. I mean, there's a lot of underserved. I mean, no one's further underserved than Jessica Chastain's character. But we've already talked about that. So,
and you didn't necessarily want a full backstory on Vuk.
Yeah, right. Exactly. What did you think?
A little different.
Okay.
My favorite is Hank.
Ah.
I really enjoyed Hank's journey. I wish they would have played it up a little bit more.
Yeah.
But I'm much more fascinated by him going through something that is so painful.
Yeah.
Recognizing that Charles is partially to blame for it.
Yeah.
And that actually driving him to seek out Charles's enemy and join ranks with him.
Yeah.
To seek revenge on Jean.
Yeah.
It's very, very outside of Hank's usual controlled nature.
Yeah.
And I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah.
And I thought they led up to it well.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, obviously, this is Jean's story, and she does get the biggest arc.
Yeah.
I have a slightly different perspective on it. I never watched a single minute of Game of Thrones, so I don't have any pre-existing Sophie Turner love.
Okay.
I've never seen her in anything other than the X-Men movies. And one thing that bugged me a bit in this movie, and I think it's bugged me about everything that they've ever done with Jean in any of these movies.
Yeah.
Is they focus so heavily on how damaged she is.
Yes.
And how out of control she is.
Right.
And the thing that I've struggled with throughout all of these movies is we've never seen her in control. We've never seen the other side of that. So we don't care about it that much.
It doesn't mean as
much. It doesn't hurt me to see Jean go through this because I've never seen Jean not going through something.
Yeah.
Are you talking
know
the
what
Sophie
I mean?
version of Jean or
any
Jean
of it, really?
Okay.
I mean, I think this was the best representation of it. Certainly better than what they did with Famke Janssen. But even still in this one, I'm like, I know she's in pain. Yeah, the story's heartbreaking. She killed her mom. Terrible. Her dad doesn't want her. That's horrific. I can't even imagine that as a parent. But I've never seen her whole. I've never seen her doing well. Yeah. So I don't have the contrast. So
like we've seen Patrick Stewart be the wise Xavier. So it makes it interesting.
And we've
to see
seen
him
Magneto
as the
be a full blown villain. So to see him struggle with morality is interesting.
Right. I got you.
But to me, it seems like Jean has always just been this frail, can't handle the power inside her kind of character.
Yeah.
And that's just not every version of her that I've read in the comics. Granted, I haven't read a lot of X-Men comics.
Sure.
But I've read enough to see her be a very strong, very powerful character, even leading the X-Men at some points.
Yeah.
And so I just kind of want that other side of the mirror, So that's not to say that her character was underserved in this movie. I think that's just something that I'm missing from the franchise as a whole.
Got it.
It's funny you say that because in the comics, she dies in 1980. Which predates a lot of people except me.
But they brought her back in the 90s with the Chris Claremont stuff with Jim Lee.
Yeah.
I mean, she's died and come back 732 times at this point.
Yeah.
I think.
But I mean it kind of goes in the next question, but it's one of the themes of when a hero becomes too powerful. I mean, essentially, Jean Grey is Ms. Marvel or Captain Marvel.
Yeah.
She's just a little too. She's incredibly powerful. The power she has, and what do you do to contain that, or should one person, have that kind of power, and what do you do with that?
Yeah, but that's a good point. Like we've seen, look at Brie Larson's Captain Marvel in the MCU. How interesting would it be to see something like this happen to her? Yeah. Now that we've seen her so confident and so in control,
because they are essentially, in a way, just as powerful as I mean, two really super powerful women.
Yeah.
And one is taking a positive spin on it, one's taking the negative spin on it.
Yeah.
It's like it's full Superman level powers. I would say even Jean Grey seems even more powerful than that.
Yeah.
Just some of the
because
ways
she has the telekinesis.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly.
Add that to the mix.
Yeah. Exactly.
And I agree. I think Scott is definitely underserved in this movie. He's underserved.
How do you feel about Scott?
Gosh. Sadly, though, I think he's treated the best in this movie out of the entire series of films.
Yeah.
Which is such a sad thing to say.
I just don't want to see this actor in a set of glasses anymore. It was Ready Player One, and now it's this. He's always like, I gotta ask him.
And we never get to see his face.
Yeah. He's gonna be this generation's Geordie LaForge.
That's exactly
Finally,
right.
we found him.
That's awesome.
Okay, we started to drift in this a little bit, so let's just go ahead and go for it. So like we said before, this movie, depending on what happens with the New Mutants, I don't think we're ever going to see that, but this is most likely the end of this franchise. So let's look back a little bit at the whole franchise now that we're at the end of our series as well. So what aspects of this franchise will you guys miss? What could have been done better? What else would you have liked to have seen? Alan, why don't you start this one, especially with your comic book knowledge?
I mean, again, the first series of movies, that's the first time you saw a superhero team in films.
Yeah.
And
which for some reason at the time seemed like an impossible thing to do.
I mean, did that come out before Spider-Man or after Spider-Man?
I think it was before. This was 99, and I think Spider-Man was 2000.
Okay, so Spider-Man made great use of CG at the time, and this one didn't have that. Didn't have the technological capabilities that. So there's still a lot of practical effects there, and I kind of like that. I big fan of the original Superman, and
Spider-Man was 2002. So there's a
way
3 year
before.
gap.
Yeah, and so I guess my heart really lays with that first series. Because it was fairly groundbreaking, and it was the first time it was like, oh yeah, this is the X-Men in a movie.
Yeah,
and I kind of, in a way, I kind of miss it, even though Marvel's kind of killing it with a lot of characters I never thought I'd see in a movie. I never thought I'd see a great rendition of Mysterio, but there it is. But at that time it was like, yeah, this is the X-Men I grew up reading.
Yeah.
All the characters are there, and the only downside was technology wasn't at the point where they could have done a lot of these powers better.
Right.
And so that's kind of there's a level of nostalgia that I have for that one that I haven't felt in a while. Even though Marvel kills it with storytelling, just kind of connecting to my childhood is not, is kind of there, but not as well as X-Men was.
Yeah, I can totally see that. I'm gonna miss. The biggest thing I'm gonna miss is Fassbender's Magneto. I am conflicted on McAvoy's Xavier, but it's almost like, I don't know if I've said this before, but I almost wish we could see Patrick Stewart as Xavier and Fassbender aged as Magneto. That I'll miss that dynamic a lot because I still feel like the MCU manufactures buddies who are upset with each other, where this is like true ideological differences, right? And so I'm gonna miss that dynamic, especially if they do go a different direction and they kind of just like put the Charles and Eric stuff aside. So I'm gonna miss that. I think what could have been done better. I think it's only easy to see what it could have been done better, looking now at what the MCU has done. Because the X-Men was the franchise, right? You had the Dark Knight trilogy, and you had a couple of Snyder films that were pseudo related, and you had some of those things going on. But we've now have an example of 22 films that all match up really well to the point where we can pick apart whether or not the timeline is perfectly accurate, which is insane because this is nothing comparative to that in terms of cohesiveness, right? So it's hard not to point to that, but I don't think that's really fair because they were playing in a different game on a different ball field,
and they were the first,
right?
This is the first real Marvel movie at that point.
Exactly.
I mean, Hulk. Was there a Hulk movie at that time?
No, not in 1999. Was there?
Daredevil and Ghost Rider. When did those come
out?
Daredevil,
Blade, Daredevil, and Ghost Rider.
Blade was good.
Yeah,
Blade was good.
It wasn't very comic booky, but it was good.
Yeah. So I think there are other things that I would have liked to have seen. I would have liked to have seen, again, 90s comics fan, 90s cartoon fan. I would have liked to have seen a little bit more of maybe those storylines. A lot more. We got to see the Sentinels, but not in the way that I would have thought we were going to see the Sentinels. I didn't hate it. But I would have loved to see a couple films, maybe a Sentinels trilogy would have been cool. So something like that. But again, I think it's easy to criticize these films in retrospect. But these were fantastic when they were coming out, and it's easy to criticize now. But that's where I'd stop.
And some of them are still fantastic.
Sure.
I would say that First Class.
Yep.
And Days of Future Past and Logan. I mean, those are fantastic.
Those three are fantastic films, no question.
So yeah, I agree. I think Fassbender's a big thing that I'll miss. Although now I'm excited to see him go do something else.
Yeah.
Yeah. What could they have done better? Do I need to talk about Scott more?
How do you feel about Scott?
I think they did great.
They castrated him, is what you said.
Yeah. Neutered. I said neutered.
Yeah.
I mean,
both.
I don't even give them the credit of making him be a human. Just neutered. They treated him like a dog.
I always loved Scott early on. I mean, he loses his girlfriend, Jean Grey, and you have deep sympathy and the way he was developed in the comics, and here he's just some punk.
It's terrible.
Yeah, it is bad. It's really bad.
It is terrible. I mean, there's a whole bunch of characters that they never touched on that would have been cool to see.
Yeah.
I would have loved to have seen Cable treated differently. That's one of my big frustrations about this franchise is I think Cable was wasted as part of a Deadpool film. There's so much more to Cable than just an angry Ryan Reynolds foil, like we could do so much better than that.
That made me think. I know a lot of people liked the portrayal of Rogue in these X-Men films, but I did not, because I was thinking of her as the more mature Rogue who is kind of like helping out all of the new mutants that join the team. She's always there to help them out. Like that's the role I kind of see Rogue in, coming from again the cartoon, and I just did not like Anna Paquin and that whole vibe. Like it just didn't appeal to me at all.
Yeah, that's you're kind of going off the rails a little bit in terms of, off of its original storytelling. And, I mean, at that time, Anna Paquin was the only Academy Award winner in the X-Men movie.
That's right.
I mean, really, Kitty was that role.
Yeah.
That should have been that role. And, and if I were to recast, Jennifer Lawrence probably would have been a better Emma Frost and probably would have made more sense in terms of her popularity and fitting within the series if it kept with Emma.
So here's the
if
question
you want
for
to
me.
feel real quick, if you want to feel a little bit better about Rogue,
you
should watch the Rogue cut of Days of Future Past.
Yeah, I should do
I
that.
need to see that one. Yeah.
So I have a question, Alan, for you guys, because I didn't read as many of the comics. Is Mystique as utilized in the comics as she is in these X-Men films?
Not in nearly the same way.
Well, she's never. I can't remember a time she was ever good.
She's always been a straight up villain.
She was the leader of the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants.
And is she Nightcrawler's mother in the comics? Sometimes,
she is
sometimes
someone's,
not.
Yeah, sometimes not. I'm trying to remember now because it flip flops between her and Emma Frost a lot.
Oh,
but didn't Mystique and Wolverine have a kid?
oh gosh!
I'm trying to remember.
The most screwed up kid.
I
ever.
know. Or something like that. Or was it her and Xavier? It might have been Mystique and Xavier, one of these weird timelines.
Yeah.
But she was always the villain. I can't ever remember her the good. Yeah, because Emma Frost winds up leading the school for a while.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because I just never could get on board with I felt like Mystique was always overutilized. It was kind of like, oh, Mystique's in this again, and she's really popular. Like, I don't understand this because this character doesn't. I don't have a frame of reference for this character. Now, I will say, in the movies where it did feel like Jennifer Lawrence cared about the role, I thought she did a really good job, and that was really interesting to me. But just so much utilization of a character that I didn't have any familiarity with was confusing.
Mm-hmm.
I have a feeling that if Jennifer Lawrence didn't blow up, if the Hunger Games thing didn't come along, then it wouldn't have been so prominent. I think after first class, they might have downplayed her character more.
Got it. Yeah, makes sense.
Although they give her a meaty role right off the bat as basically Xavier's sister.
It's true. Yeah.
Adopted sister.
Yeah, exactly.
The puppy they took in.
Yeah. Right.
That was the last question I had.
Yeah.
Before we move on to the aftercast, is there anything else you guys have been wanting to say that I didn't set you up for?
Well, the thing about X-Men was, it was an allegory of basically the racial injustice, racial inequality of the 60s. And it's kind of weird. In a way, it might have succeeded. In a way, it hasn't. I think we're still seeing parallels even today.
Yeah.
And that is something they touch on, but I don't know that. I think that's why I appreciate most about the X-Men comics is that they delve a lot deeper into that than the movies did.
That's a great point.
Yeah.
I would love to see a movie that dug into that a lot deeper. That would be really, really cool.
Yeah. And it was always done at the macro level as opposed to, the individual lives of these characters.
Right.
You can't always fight the government.
Yeah. That's awesome. Well, Alan, why don't you tell us a little bit about FilmThreat, what you guys are up to again, and point people to a place where they can find out more.
Yeah. FilmThreat, just come on over to FilmThreat.com. We review independent films. We have features, interviews with independent filmmakers. We review everything. So if any of you out there are independent filmmakers and want to get your film reviewed, send it our way. We are Rotten Tomatoes approved. Nice. So, if we're the only review and we like your movie, you're 100% on Rotten Tomatoes. So,
there you go.
Yes. So that's filmthreat.com, and then you can also reach me at mypal Al on Twitter.
Well, that's it for today's show. Special thanks again to Alan Ng from FilmThreat for joining us. That was the last episode in our X-Men series. Hope you enjoyed our X-Men series. If you haven't listened to all the episodes, go back and listen to all of our other episodes covering the X-Men. We did a lot of really cool shows with some great guests. And coming up in a couple weeks, Disney movies. You don't want to miss that. We have some awesome guests lined up for that as well. Subscribe on your preferred podcast provider to make sure you don't miss any upcoming shows. If you enjoy the Story Geeks podcast, please share our show with a geek friend or review the Story Geeks podcast on Apple Podcasts. We are going to start recording our aftercast, so I hope you'll join us for that as well. We'll be talking about recasting all the X-Men actors and actresses since they no longer have jobs, casting them in other superhero roles. Get more information on our Aftercast and all of our other content over at thestorygeeks.com. Thanks for listening, and as always, question everything in your favorite geek stories, and always seek the truth. Special thanks to these amazing people who help us produce the Story Geeks podcast by supporting us on Patreon. Anthony Holder, Adam Vargas, Bob Sherfield, Brianna, Bryce Cox, Connie Moe, Jessica Pritchett, Jim and Mary Baldwin, Joshua Beckham, Jeremy and Kimberly Lugeau, Julian Armstrong, Monty Thigpen, Nathan Miller, Nick Prokop, Ray DeLeon, Rondell Dobard, Samuel Peloquin, and Wade Johnson. To gain access to our Aftercast and unlock more Patreon rewards, or just to support the show, please head over to thestorygeeks.com for more information. And again, you might want to consider purchasing Time Slingers. I think you'll really enjoy it. Thanks.